Alrighty, here we go. Thank y'all for tuning in. You know what time it is. It's the BGCSI Online Book Club, and we are going through the book Hatchet by Gary Paulson. We've already trekked through this week, and we're up to chapter 6 already. Can you believe it? Already at chapter 6. So, yet again, as those notifications are going past your phone, please, if you haven't, follow us on Facebook. Not only follow us, please go ahead and make sure you click that little notification so that you get notified every time we go online, so that you stay up to date on the latest and greatest. Look, we're about to start serving lunch as well in a little bit from 3:30 to 5:30. Not lunch, but supper. So if you're wanting to come, grab a bite to eat. I believe today we have to thank the wonderful, 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 kind generosity of the folks over at Hunan who will be providing today's supper. I believe it's chicken lo mein with a fortune cookie, and hopefully your fortune's looking bright. So we thank Hunan yet again for their awesome support and helping us meet the needs of our members and families. So I think that's giving you good enough time to tune in. Please hit that share button. Please go ahead and send this to friends and family. Gather the kids around as we're going to continue on with chapter 6. As we ended with chapter 5, Brian Roberson now, he realizes, hey, he has to do something. He can't, I love how chapter 5 ended. He's really motivating himself. He's pushing himself to say, okay, hey, I got to do something. I got to make a plan. I got to set things in action. So let's see what plan he comes up with. Ooh, let me forget. I almost forgot to push a button to do not disturb so we don't get interrupted during our... Don't want no interruptions. There we go. Now we're all good to go and get started with chapter 6. Got my beverage with me now. 2 years before he and Terry had been fooling around down near the park, where the city seemed to end for a time and the trees grew thick and came down to the small river that went through the park. It was thick there. It seemed kind of wild, and they had been joking and making things up, and they pretended that they were lost in the woods and talked in the afternoon about what they would do. Of course, they figured they'd have all sorts of a gun, a knife, fishing gear, and matches so they could hunt and fish and have a fire. I wish you were here, Terry thought, with a gun, a knife, and some matches. In the park that time, they had decided the best shelter was a lean-to, and Brian set out how to make one up. Maybe cover it with grass or leaves or sticks, he thought. He started to go down the lake again, where there were some willows he could cut down for braces, but it struck him that he ought to find a good place for the lean-to, and he decided to look around first. He wanted to stare near the lake because he thought the plane, even deep in water, might show up to somebody flying over, and he didn't want to diminish any chance he might have of being. His eyes fell upon the stone ridge to his left, and he thought at first he should build his shelter against the stone. But before that, he decided to check out the other side of the ridge, and that's where he got lucky. Using the sun and the fact that it rose in the east and set in the west, he decided at the far side of the northern side of the ridge. At one time, it had been scooped by something, probably a glacier, and this scooping had left a kind of sideways back in under a ledge. It wasn't very deep, not a cave, but it was smooth and made the perfect roof and stand in under the ledge. He had to hold his head slightly tipped forward at the front to keep it from hitting the die stop. Some of the rock that had been scooped out had also been pulverized by the glacial action, turned into sand, and now made a small sand beach that went down to the edge of the water in front of the right of the overhang. It was his first sign of good luck. No, he thought, he had good luck in the landing, but this was luck he needed. All he had to do was wall off part of the bowl and leave an opening as a doorway, and he would have a perfect shelter, much stronger than a lean-to and dry because the overhang made a watertight roof. He crawled back in and under the die ledge and sat. The sand was cool here in the shade, and the die coolness felt wonderful to his face, which was already starting to blister and get especially painful on his forehead, with the blisters on top of the swelling. He was also still weak. Just to walk around the back of the ridge and the slight climb over the top had left his legs rubbery. It felt good to sit for a bit under the shade and under the overhang in the cool sand. And now he thought, if I just had something to eat. anything. When he had rested a bit, he went back down to the lake and drank a couple swallows of water. He wasn't all that thirsty, but he thought the water might help to take the edge off his hunger. It didn't. Somehow, the cold lake water actually made it worse, sharpened it. He thought of dragging in wood to make a wall or on part of the overhang, and picked up one piece to pull up. But his arms were too weak, and he knew then it wasn't just the crash and the injury to his body and head. It was also that he was weak from hunger. He would have to find something to eat. Before he did anything else, he would have to find something to eat. But what? Brian leaned against the rock and stared out at the lake. What in all of this was there to eat? He was so used to having food just be there, just always being there. When he was hungry, he went to the icebox, or to the dye store, or sat down at a meal that his mother cooked. Oh, he thought, remembering a meal now. Oh, it was last Thanksgiving. Last year, they had a family Thanksgiving before his mother demanded the divorce, and his father moved out in the following January. Brian already knew the secret, but did not know what would cause them to break up, and thought it might work out. The secret that his father still did not know, but that he would try to tell him when he saw him. The meal had been turkey, and they cooked it in the backyard in the barbecue over the coal with the lid down tight. His father had put hickory chips on the charcoal, and the smell of the cooking turkey and the hickory smoke had filled the yard. When his father took the lid off, smiling, the smell that had came out was unbelievable. And when they sat down to eat, the meat was wet with juice and rich and had the taste of smoke in it. He had to stop this. His mouth was full of saliva and his stomach was twisting and growling. What was there to eat? What had he read or seen that told him about food in the wilderness? Hadn't there been something? A show, yes, a show on television about Air Force pilots and some kind of course they took. A survival course. All right. He had the show coming into his thoughts now. The pilots had to live in the desert. They put them in the desert down in Arizona or someplace they had to live for a week. They had to find food and water for a week. For water, they had made a sheet of plastic into a dew-gathering device, and for food, they ate lizards. That was it. Of course, Brian had lots of water, and there weren't too many lizards in the Canadian woods. That he knew. One of the pilots had used a watch crystal as a magnifying glass to focus the sun and start a fire, so they didn't have to eat the lizards raw. But Brian had a digital watch, without a crystal broken at that. So the show didn't help him much. Wait, there was one thing. One of the pilots, a woman, had found some kind of beans on a bush and used them with the lizard meat to make a little stew in a tin can she had found. Bean lizard stew. There weren't any beans here, but there must be berries. There had to be a berry bush around. Sure, the woods were full of berry bushes. That's what everybody always said. Well, he actually never heard anybody say it, but he felt that it should be true. There must be berry bushes. He stood and moved out into the sand and looked up at the sun. It was still high. He didn't know what time it must be. At home, it would be 1 or 2 if the sun were that high. At home, at 1 or 2, his mother would be putting away the lunch dishes and getting ready for her exercise class. No, that would have been yesterday. Today she would be going to see him. Today was Thursday, and she always went to see him on Thursdays. Wednesdays was the exercise class, and Thursdays she went to see him. Hot little jets of hate worked into his thoughts. Pushed once, moved back. If his mother hadn't begun to see him and forced a divorce, Brian wouldn't be here now. He shook his head. He had to stop that kind of thinking. The sun was still high. That meant he had some time before darkness to find berries. He didn't want to be away from his, he almost thought of it as a home, shelter when it came to be dark. He didn't want to be anywhere in the woods when it came to be dark, and he didn't want to get lost, which was a real problem. He knew that in the world was the lake in front of him, and the hills was at his back at the ridge. If he lost sight of them, there was a really good chance that he would get turned around and not find his way back. So he had to look for berry bushes, but keep the lake or the rock ridge in sight at all times. He looked up the shore to the north. For a good distance, perhaps 200 yards, it was fairly clear. There were tall pines, the kind with no limbs until very close to the top, with a gentle breeze sighing in them, but not too much low brush. 200 yards up there seemed to be a belt of thick lower brush starting about 10 or 12 feet high, and that formed a wall he could not see through. It seemed to go on around the lake, thick and lustily green, but he could not be sure. If there were berries, they would be in that brush, he felt. And as long as he stayed close to the lake, so he could keep the water on his right and know it was there, he wouldn't get lost. When he was done or found berries, he thought he would just turn around so the water was on his left and walk back until he came to the ridge and his shelter. Simple. Keep it simple. I am Brian Roberson. I have been in a plane crash. I'm going to find some food. I'm going to find berries. He walked slowly, still a bit pained in his joints and weak from hunger, along the side of the lake. The trees were full of birds singing ahead of him in the sun. Some he knew, some he didn't. He saw a robin and some kind of sparrows, a flock of reddish-orange birds with thick beaks. 20 or 30 of them were just sitting on one of the pines. They made such a noise and flew away ahead of him when he walked under the tree. He watched them fly, their color a bright slash of solid green, and in the way he found the berries. The birds landed in some of the taller willow-type undergrowth with wide leaves and started jumping and making noise. At first he was too far away to see what they were doing, but their color drew him and he moved toward them, keeping the lake in sight on his right. And when he got closer, he saw they were eating berries. He could not believe it was that easy. It was as if the birds had taken him right to the berries. The slender branches went up about 20 feet and were heavy, drooping with clusters of bright red berries. They were half as big as grapes, but hung in bunches like grapes. When Brian saw them, glistening red in the sunlight, he almost yelled. His pace quickened, and he was in them in moments, scattering the birds, grabbing branches, stripping them to fill his mouth with berries. He almost spit them out. It wasn't that they were bitter so much as they lacked any sweetness, had a tart flavor that left his mouth a dry feeling. And they were like cherries in that they had large pits, which made them hard to chew. But there was such a hunger in him, such an emptiness, that he could not stop and kept stripping the branches and eating berries by the handful, grabbing and jamming them into his mouth and swallowing them pits and all. He could not stop. When at last his stomach was full, he could not stop. And when at last his stomach was full, he was still hungry. 2 days without food must have shrunken his stomach, but the drive of hunger was still there. Thinking of the birds and how they would come back into the berries when he left, he made a carrying pouch with his torn windbreaker and kept picking. Finally, when he judged he had close to 4 pounds in the jacket, he stopped and went back to the camp by the ridge. Now, he thought, now I have some food, and I could do something about fixing this place up. He glanced at the sun and saw he had some time before dark. If only I had matches, he thought. Looking ruefully at the beach and the lakeside, there was driftwood everywhere, not to mention dead and dry wood all over the hill, and dead and dry branches hanging from every tree, all firewood and no matches. How did they used to do it, he thought? Rub 2 sticks together? He tucked the berries in the pouch back in the under of the overhang in the cool shade and found a couple of sticks. After 10 minutes of rubbing, he felt the sticks and they were almost cool to the touch. Not that, he thought. They didn't do fire that way. He threw the sticks down in disgust. So no fire. But he could still fix a shelter and make it. Here the word safer came into his mind, and he didn't know why. More livable. Kind of close in it, he thought. I'll just close it in a bit. He started dragging sticks up from the lake and pulling long dead branches down from the hill, never getting out of sight of the water and the ridge. With these, he interlaced and wove a wall across the opening of the front of the rock. It took almost 2 hours. He had to stop several times because he still felt a bit weak, once because he felt a strange new twinge in his stomach, a tightening, a rolling. Too many berries, he thought. I ate too many of them. But it was gone soon, and he kept working until the entire front of the overhang was covered, save for a small opening at the right end, nearest the lake. The doorway was about 3 feet, and when he went in, he found himself in a room almost 15 feet long and 8 feet to 10 feet deep, with the rocks sloping down at the rear. Good, he said, nodded. Good. Outside, the sun was going down, finally, and in the initial coolness, the mosquitoes came out again and clouded in on him. They were thick, terrible, if not quite as bad as in the morning. He kept brushing them off with his arms until he couldn't stand it and dumped the berries out and put the wind-torn breaker on. At least the sleeves covered his arms. Wrapped in the jacket, with darkness coming down fast, he crawled back in under the rock and huddled and tried to sleep. He was deeply tired and still aching some, but sleep was slow coming and did not finally settle in until the evening cool turned to night cool and the mosquitoes slowed. Then at last, with his stomach turning on berries, Brian went to sleep. And that concludes our reading for today, chapter 6. Brian now, he's making a plan. And like I said, he's taking that positive energy that he has, that positive motivation, and he's reminding himself, okay, hey, even though I'm in this adverse situation, I'm not going to let it beat me down. I need to do something. He made a plan, found some berries, got back, created a shelter, and found things starting to look a little bit better than it was before. Now we have to wonder and see, okay, hey, how long until help arrives? How long is the food going to last? Are the berries, and you hear that his stomach is going through some issues, is that going to cause some problems? What is he going to do about these mosquitoes that keep eating them up? So many questions that are still out there. And as always, there's only one way to find out. So please make sure you tune in with us tomorrow at 12 noon. We're going to be going over chapter 7. And then in the afternoon tomorrow, we'll be going over chapter 8 at 3 o'clock. So please, if this has been something that you've been enjoying, please make sure to share this message. Please make sure to get it out. Please make sure to let people know to watch the rebroadcast and check up. Please know that we're about to start serving supper from 3:30 to 5:30 in just 15 minutes. We'll also have copies available of Hatchet as well if you'd like one for you and your family to read. But thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow morning at 12 noon. You guys have a great day.